Hello and welcome to the Progress Report form training for grantees of the Consolidated Youth Grant Program to address children and youth experiencing domestic violence and sexual assault and engaging men and boys as allies. Since this is a pretty long title, we will instead be using the acronym CY and EMY as we go through this presentation instead of saying Consolidated Youth or Engaging Men and Youth. This particular training is for CY grantees that are Engaging Men projects. So that is grantees filling out the Engaging Men and Youth in Preventing Sexual Assault, Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, and Stalking Grant Program Progress Report. So if you are looking at the split screen, we have the PowerPoint on one screen that we will be using today, and on the other side is the progress reporting form that Engaging Men's projects use. This training will go over the entire CY EMY form, section by section. So before we begin, I just want to note that there are 2 reporting periods. The first from January to June, and that report is due 30 days after the close of the reporting form, which would be July 30th. And the second reporting period being July to December, and that report would be due January 30th. So first and foremost, thank you for accessing this reporting. We hope that this training enables you to provide the most detailed and accurate reporting for your grant-funded work. Accurate data reporting is important for many reasons. Your quantitative and qualitative data enables VAWA's effectiveness to be measured. VAWA MEI creates reports for OVW using your data and data from grantees across the country. These summary data reports support OVW to make requests for increased appropriations and to defend VAWA funding to decision makers. Your data also helps OVW to make sure federal funds are being spent appropriately and to measure the performance of your grant programs. Additionally, every 2 years, the Attorney General is required to submit a report to Congress on the overall effectiveness of VAWA funding. VAWA grantee data makes up a significant part of that mandated report. And the more consistently grantees fill out their report, the more accurate VAWA's effectiveness can be measured through these means. Here are a few tips for successful data reporting. First and foremost, we encourage you to read the separate instructions you have downloaded with the progress reporting form. These instructions can be found on VAWA MEI's website along with a sample reporting form. In these instructions, you'll find many helpful examples to assist you in filling out the reporting form. Additionally, if you are looking at the GMS form, you will see question marks in the far left column. You can click on those and the same instructions will appear along with examples, and those question marks are all throughout the form for you to use. Next, we encourage you to use the other category only if no other close fit exists. For example, if you're looking at the staff section and you have a staff person that may fit into a category, but it isn't quite a perfect description of their role, we encourage you to put them into that closest fit category rather than reporting them in the other column. The reason for this is that when we aggregate data for reports, often responses in the other category will not be included. However, there are some cases where other really is the only option to accurately capture what you are reporting, and that's fine. We just ask that you rule out all other options first. When other is the only option, go ahead and check other and use the narrative box to provide a description to further detail what that other is. Additionally, if you do not have an other to report, leave the box blank. Please don't report NA or none. Following most sections of the form, you will find optional narrative questions. Use these sections to talk about the unique successes of your grant-funded activities. Talk about the impact grant-funded activities have made on your community or for survivors. These questions exist at the end of each section so that you can provide more detail about the work being done in each area that the hard data does not capture on its own. These additional narrative questions are optional, but we encourage you to report in the optional narrative questions as to help your program to most accurately capture the work you're doing with grant funds. We ask that you try not to use acronyms or abbreviations in your data. If you do use an acronym, please provide an explanation in each question that you use that acronym in. If it's DV or SA, we can usually figure out what that means, but if the acronyms for an organization, we don't always know necessarily what that is referring to. So again, just please explain what the acronym means at some point in your narrative so that we can give your answer the proper context. Do not send attachments or extra documents containing data that is asked for in the report. Only data that is contained in the reporting form itself will be received and analyzed by Muskie's VAWA MEI. And finally, if you have any questions about reporting, give us a call or send us an email. We're here to help, and we will happily work through any scenarios or questions you have about your report. Section A1 is grant information. All grantees must fill out this section. For question 1, fill out the date you upload your report to GMS and submit to OBW. Questions 2 through 4 will be pre-populated for you. You won't need to do anything once you've downloaded the form from GMS. It's very uncommon, but if for some reason your form pre-populates with information that is not accurate, you will want to contact GMS so that they can make sure you are filling out the correct report. And as you can see on the far left side are the question marks that I talked about earlier. They are here for you to click on if you need assistance in that with that question, and they are throughout the entire form. Question 5 asks about the type of grantee organization. Here you can only check one option, so please choose the option that most closely describes your organization. If none of these options are a close fit, there is another category where you can specify your organization type. And question 5A is where you can further specify the type of grantee organization that you checked off in question 5. So if there is particular information you would like to share or that makes your program unique, you would want to write that here. Question 6 is your point of contact. This is the person that is responsible for the day-to-day activities of the grant. This is not necessarily the program director or the fiscal agent. It should be the person most capable of answering questions about the grant in case we need to contact your organization about your data. Question 7 is your organization faith-based? Just simply check yes or no. In question 8, tribal population, check yes if your Engaging Men in Youth grant specifically focuses on tribal populations. If so, indicate which tribes or nations you reach, and please be specific. Answers such as all tribes in our state are not valid. Instead, we ask that you be specific and give the name of each tribe or nation. If you run out of room, please feel free to continue in the narrative question, in question 40. Question 9, indicate which culturally specific or underserved populations you specifically address in your grant-funded work. Check all that apply. And question 9A gives you space to write additional information about those populations you reported in question 9. Question 10, percentage of funds. Indicate what percentage of your EMY grant funds are directed to sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. The percentages should be based on the amount of time you spend to address each issue. And the division of time is up to your discretion, but the total must equal 100%. Additionally, the percentages may change each reporting period depending on your activities. Just because you reported one way last reporting period does not mean it will necessarily be the same for this reporting period. Section A2, staff information. If you use grant funding to provide staffing, you're going to check yes to this section and proceed to filling it out. Before we get into the form itself, let's go over some tips for reporting staff. When considering reporting staff, only report FTEs for staff whose salary is provided fully or partially by grant funds. Also, be sure to include staff time of contracted work. Report a staff person by activities performed rather than by job title. If you look at the staff categories, scroll down a little bit for you. They are detailing specific activities that a staff person may do. If you have a program coordinator who is doing program coordinating as well as community education and community organization, you're going to split their time between those particular categories. Next, time should be prorated if necessary. So if you have a full-time staff person that is fully funded by the grant, but they got hired on halfway through the grant period, then you're going to prorate that FTE to reflect that amount of staff time. And we'll go through an example of that later. Report to the second decimal and use the other category sparingly. Oftentimes with staff, when we see the other option used, we can usually reassign them to an activity category listed above. If your staff person truly only fits in the other category, and that does happen, it's fine. Just use the narrative box to give their job title or describe their function as a staff person. This slide shows you some tips for calculating FTEs. FTEs are based on 40 hours a week for 26 weeks or 1,040 working hours in a 6-month reporting period. So this is a nice little cheat sheet to help you calculate an FTE. There are a couple of ways that you can calculate FTEs. The first is if you know the staff person's total hours worked for the report period, you can divide that number by 1,040 and it will give you the FTE. The second way is if you know on average how often a staff person is using grant funds to perform their duties, you can take the staff time that the person worked in 1 week and divide it by 40, and that will also give you the FTE. Here's an example. Your CY grant funds are used to fund one full-time community organizer whose salary is 75% funded by the grant, and another full-time community organizer whose salary is funded 50% by the grant. So in this case, you would report only the percent of salary that is CY grant funded. So the correct FTE under community organizer would be 1.25 FTE, which is 75% plus 50%. The second example is your CY grant funds a full-time employee who spends spent 16 hours a week coordinating the program and 24 hours a week training professionals in the field and holding community education events. So in this case, you would divide staff time by function. The correct FTE under program coordinator would be 0.4, which is 16 hours divided by 40 hours, and 0.6 FTE under educator/trainer, and that's the 24 hours divided by 40 hours. The third example is of a full-time grant-funded secretary who was hired 3 months into the reporting period. So in this case, you would need to prorate the FTE to reflect 3 months out of the 6 months in that reporting period. So the correct FTE under support staff would be 0.5 FTEs, and that's 3 months divided by 6 months. Section B, program activities. This is also a section that all grantees must complete. So in question 12, you would check all areas that apply to activities engaged in with CY EMY funds during the current reporting period. If you are not sure which areas apply to your grant program, you should refer to your grant proposal. If the solicitation that you applied under encouraged program interest areas and you address those, please write about that in question 13, right down here at the bottom. Section C1, Planning and Development. You're only going to fill out this section if you are in the planning phase of your grant. You will report the number of meetings and the number of people who attended those meetings here in question 14. Question 15 is a check all that apply question, and you'll check all activities that you conducted during the planning and development phase. Question 16 looks at the different mandatory activities of your planning and development phase. The left column shows organizations that you may have engaged with during your planning and development period. In the column on the right, you'll check the frequency of those meetings you have with the organizations you're working with, either weekly, monthly, or quarterly. One of the things that may get tricky with this question is that you can only check one box for each organization. So if you meet with one domestic violence program on a monthly basis and another domestic violence program on a weekly basis, the form will not let you check both monthly and weekly options. So in this case, we ask that you check the most frequently used option. So for our DV example, we would check off weekly meetings for the domestic violence program option. And in the last column, you will want to check off if that agency is an MOU partner. So if you have a memorandum of understanding with any of these agencies you are working with, please mark it here. Question 17 looks at technical assistance received during the planning phase. This is slightly laid out like the last question. We have the type of TA on the left, and on the right you will fill in the numbers for how many site visits, consultations, or training events were conducted. And then question 18 is an optional narrative question to provide us with more information about your planning and development phase, as well as the agencies you are collaborating with. Section C2 is training. If you have used grant funds for training, you'll check yes. If not, you can continue on to the next section. So here are a couple of tips for the training section. For the purpose of this reporting form, training is defined as activities for professionals or volunteers acting in the role of a professional to improve their response to victims or survivors as it relates to their role in the system. For training, you want to think about the professionals that you are training to improve their response to survivors in the area that they work. You'll not be counting community education in this section. Sometimes we see parents or youth included in the number of people trained. For the purposes of this form, they are not considered professionals, so if we see them in the training section, we're going to move them to the education section instead. Before we get into the example, I want to orient you to the form. So question 19 asks for you to report the number of training events that you provided for the reporting period with grant funds. This should be an unduplicated count. Question 20 asks for you to report the number of people that were trained at these events. So looking at the first column, this is where you're going to report the number of people trained that were grant funded or MOU, that were grant funded grantees and MOU partners. The second column is where you will report individuals trained that were not grant funded. And the third column is the number of other professionals. And then finally in the last column, the total. So let's get into our example. EY grant funds supported 12 training events for professionals this reporting period. 3 training events provided by other funds also took place. 150 professionals attended the grant-funded training events. 38 professionals attended training events provided by other grant funds. So in this case, you would only report the 12 grant-funded trainings in question 19 and the 150 professionals that attended those trainings in question 20. Question 21 looks at content areas. Once we get to it. There we go. These will be the topics that you presented or trained on, and it's a check all that apply, so you can select every topic in these lists that were covered by your training. And question 22 is another optional additional information question. Here you can discuss the effectiveness of your trainings or provide any additional information that may give further insight into what you were able to accomplish this reporting period with your grant fund. Section C3, community organizing, mobilization, and prevention activities. If you use grant funds to directly support community organizing, mobilization, and or prevention activities, you will check yes and continue with this section. Question 23 looks at one-time events provided. These are events that you use grant funds for your community organizing, mobilization, and prevention efforts. There is a list of the type of events, and there is an other category. So if you do not see your event type in the list, then you may use the other categories since this is not an exhaustive list. In the first column, you'll put the total number of events for that event type. And in the second column, you will list the total number of people that attended the events reported for that event type. And then question 24 asks for the venue at which events were held, and this is a check all that apply question. So let's go into an example. CY grant funds supported 10 information tables, 2 public forums, and 13 school presentations. 1,150 people visited information tables, 75 people attended each public forum, and 620 students and educators were reached through the school presentations. In this case, grant funds supported all of the above activities. Therefore, all should be reported in question 23. I can scroll up so you can see how that was filled out. Question 25. Question 25 is different in that it is looking at ongoing activities. These are not one-time events. These are events where you are meeting with roughly the same audience over time. For instance, if you are working with students in an after-school program and you meet with them once a week over a 6-week period, that's an ongoing activity, and that's the type of information that you're going to report for this question. And the people reached is quite long. The list is quite long, so I encourage you to go through the list before using the other category, since it is a fairly exhaustive list. Across the top, you'll see the different types of ongoing activities. Again, there is the option for other, which you can use if there isn't a close fit, and then you can use the narrative box to further describe the type of activity. And here you can see how long this list is, so it is fairly exhaustive. And then question 26, topics of community organizing, mobilization events provided with CY/EMY funds. And again, this is a check all that apply. So you'll check all topics that were covered. So let's get into an example. Your organization held 3 different ongoing education courses over a 5-week period. Each class was made up of 20 participants. All classes were supported with CY grant funds. So because CY grant funds supported all of the above activities, 3 education courses should be reported in question 25, and 60 total participants should be included in the people reached row. That's consistent with the type of attendee. And you can see that filled out for you in this example. And we already discussed question 26. So question 27 is another optional additional information question where you can explain anything about the events that you feel wasn't captured by the questions above. Section C4, public education awareness campaigns. If you use grant funds to directly support public education or awareness campaigns, you would check yes and answer the following questions. So question 28 looks at the various types of activities that you perform for your public education or awareness campaign. You can see the types of activities listed on the left, and on the right you're going to report the number of times that activity occurred. A tip for when you're filling out this section is what we define as education. For the purposes of this form, education is defined as the dissemination of general information that may increase public awareness of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Unlike the training section, this is for the general public, so this is not specific to professionals. And now we can get into an example. So using CY grant funds, your program conducted 5 different poster campaigns. Additionally, CY grant funded staff ran 3 different online social media campaigns and attended 2 press conferences. So in this case, you would report 5 in poster campaigns, 3 in online social media, and 2 in press conferences. And you can see that filled out right here for you. Question 29 addresses the intended audience for these activities. A lot of grantees will ask how they can estimate who they reach through these campaigns. So since these campaigns are oftentimes through channels where you may not know who heard or had access to the information, we can't say who exactly was reached. What we can say is who the intended audience was for each campaign. And that's why this question is designed a little differently than other sections of the form. And again, this is a check all that apply question. Another check all that apply question is question 30, which looks at the topics of your public education or awareness activities. So you will check all of the topics that were covered across activities, and there's also an other box in case there was a topic that's outside of the categories listed for this question. Question 31, another lovely additional information question. So go ahead and use this as an opportunity for you to provide more detail about your activities. Section C5 is volunteer activities. If your youth program grant funds were used to provide volunteer development during the current reporting period, then you will check yes and answer the following questions. Question 32 looks at the number of volunteers. The first line is the total number recruited, and the second line is the number of volunteers that were trained during the current reporting period. It's not uncommon for these 2 numbers to be different. It isn't always the case that all volunteers that were recruited during one reporting period were able to receive their training during that same reporting period. Question 33 asks about volunteer activities. So of the volunteers that were trained, what were the activities that they were partaking in during the reporting period? So here we'll get into an example. CY grant funds supported the recruitment of 12 volunteers. 10 of the 12 completed training and then engaged in mentoring during the reporting period. 2 did not attend the training and did not engage in mentoring. So in this case, you would report 12 in the recruited category and 10 in the trained category for question 32. Because of all 10 volunteers were recruited, only 10 were trained for the current reporting period. And then in question 33, 10 would be reported in the mentoring category. Question 34, optional additional information. You can use this to further discuss your volunteer activities and their effectiveness. Section C6, coordinated community response. All grantees must fill out this subsection. Even if you're still in the planning phase and you have not yet started using your funds, you need to fill out this section. If this is the case, you'll want to list all of the types of organizations you are working with or that you intend to work with. Once you're out of the planning phase and you're meeting with these organizations, then you'll fill out this section according to the checkboxes. But while you're in the planning phase, it's a bit different. It's based more on who you are planning on or anticipate, or I'm sorry, what you are planning on or anticipate doing. The left column is the type of agency you're meeting with, and it is a pretty comprehensive list. The next section shows consultations or technical assistance, and you'll check the frequency that these interactions occur with each particular type of organization. And you have the choice of daily, weekly, or monthly. And you'll do this again for the next column labeled meetings. The only difference is the frequency has changed to weekly, monthly, or quarterly. And then finally in the last column, you'll check if this type of organization is an MOU partner. When you're looking at the frequency of interactions, each week may not be a perfect fit. So what you would look at is the number of times that you met with these organizations over the reporting period. So if you met with an immigrant agency roughly 26 times during the reporting period, then you would check weekly. Or if you met with them around 6 times during the current reporting period, then you would check monthly. And on the next page, the organization list continues. And as you can see, there is also another box listed. So if you don't see your organization type, you can fill it in here. Question 36 is another optional additional information question. Here you can discuss the effectiveness of your community coordinated activities or community coordinated response activities, or give us any additional information that you think we may need in order to fully understand the work that your organization is doing with your grant funds beyond what's captured by the checkboxes. Next is section C7, policies. If your program used grant funds to develop, revise, or implement policies during the reporting period, then you would check yes, and then check all of the boxes below that apply. When we say substantially revised, that means that you've spent a significant amount of time working with the team to revise a policy to better meet the needs of victims or survivors in your community. It doesn't mean that you added a definition or worked with a community partner to freshen it up a bit. So when answering this question, think about whether or not you spent a significant amount of time working on this policy. Another important note for this section is that you should not report on a policy that you're working on until it is the reporting period where it's actually finished. So when you begin to work on a policy or protocol during one report period, but it's not implemented until a different reporting period, that's the case where you would wait to report this policy or protocol until it is finished. And the reason for this is because if you report during this period, if during the period that you begin work, you would also be reporting it in the period when it's finished, and that would be double counting. So in order to get an unduplicated count, we ask that you only report policies in the period that they are finished and being implemented. Question 38 on the next page is another optional additional information section where you can write about in more detail the policy work that you're doing. Section C8 looks at products. If you use your Engaging Men funds to develop, revise, or distribute products, you would check yes and continue on to answer the questions in this section. So here's an example in the GMS. We have one brochure developed. This is asking how many you developed, not how many you printed or handed out. Next is the title or topic of the product. Then you will fill out who your intended audience was for the product. After that, fill in the number used or distributed. An important note here is that this is not the number that you printed. You may have printed 500 copies, but if you only distributed 185 of those 500, then you'll report 185. And last, list any other languages that you made this product available in other than English. Section D is the narrative section. First and foremost, all grantees must answer question 40 for each reporting period. Question 40 looks at the status of the goals and objectives for your Engaging Men and Youth Program grant. You will discuss the status of the goals and objectives for your grant at the end of the current reporting period as they were identified in your grant proposal. You will indicate if goals or objectives are in progress, delayed, or if they've been revised. Here you can talk about the successes and challenges. If there are goals or objectives that have not been met, this is where you must provide an explanation as to why this is the case. This question is the one that your program specialist will pay most attention to. So they will use this question to monitor your grant funds, how they see the work you're doing. They may see that you are having issues in a specific area and provide you with technical assistance. So this is why it's really important to provide them with as much information as possible in this question so that they can ensure that your program is getting everything it needs for success. The status of your grant's goals or objectives will change from reporting period to reporting period based on how far along you are in the progression of those goals. If you have a goal or objective that you would like to change, then you will need to talk to your program specialist about that. This is something that they will approve, and then this is the question where you would discuss this. Question 41 and 42 must be completed by all grantees annually, so you will answer this question during your January to June reporting period only. Question 41 asks about remaining areas of need. Here you will discuss what you see as the most significant areas of remaining need for victims or survivors. This question is where you will talk about challenges or barriers that are unique to your community. When answering this question, think about geographic regions, underserved populations, and service delivery systems. So think more global and less specific to your grant. Question 42 asks you to discuss what your grant funds allowed you to do or maintain that you would not be able to without grant funds. This question will be more specific to your grant, so you'll want to talk about what's changed in your community due to these funds. This is a question that we look at a lot and use for most of our reports to Congress or to OBW. Questions 43 and 44 are optional. We do encourage you to use them in order to help us better understand your data or give us insight into your program's successes that may not be captured by numeric data in the form. So question 43 asks you to write about any additional information about your program grant's effectiveness. Question 44 is where you will provide us with any additional information that you want us to know about the data you submitted. That's where you would do that. So this is a great space for you to clarify any changes you'd like us to make. if the GMS form did not allow you to report any numbers correctly. An example would be if you're filling out the number of people that attended a community event and GMS will only allow you to fill in 3 digits, but your actual number had 4 digits, you would let us know here. So if you tried to input 1,500 people attending an event and the highest number of GMS would allow is 999, then you could fill in that 999 on your form so you can move on, but let us know here the actual true answer, and then we can change it from our end. And this is the question that we look at first before we do any other work with your data. So now that you've filled out your form, you need to validate it before you're able to submit it back into the GMS system. You're going to hit the Validate button. Once you do that, there are 3 possible messages that will pop up. The first is a big red X. This is what we call a hard warning. This means that there's something in your form that the computer thinks is an error, and it will not let you proceed until you correct it. So we advise you to click yes, and it will bring you to that spot on the form, and you can fix it as necessary. The next type of warning we call a stopped warning. This is a yellow triangle with an exclamation point, and this means that there's something on your form that the system thinks could be an error. It will still let you validate without correcting anything. We suggest that you click yes and review the issue. The last message is not a warning, but a message letting you know that your form has been successfully validated and is ready for your submission. So at this point, you're able to save your reporting form and upload it back into the GMS system. Here is the Muskie VAWA MEI website. Here you can look at sample progress reporting forms and instructions. We have training dates and materials. You can take a look at our final reports to Congress and summary data report, and you can also get OBW updates for reporting on our website. If you have any questions about reporting, we do urge you to give us a call or send us an email. Let us know what reporting form you're working with, and we'll be sure to connect you to the staff person that's working with your data. If you have any questions about your grant funds or if you need an activity or product approved, you can reach your program specialist at the number on the screen. Additionally, if you have any issues or questions regarding the GMS itself, GMS can be reached with the information on the bottom of the slide. I'd like to thank you again for accessing this recording. I also want to reiterate that we're always more than happy to talk with you and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.